Hi, I'm Sal Mercogliano, Associate Professor of History at Campbell University, former merchant mariner, and an Associate Professor in Maritime Industry Policy at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. Welcome to this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. So, just had the release of a report that comes out every 5 years, and it talks about the state of seafarers out there. It's a joint report put out by BIMCO, the Baltic International Maritime Council, and ICS, the International Chamber of Shipping. They put out this report every 5 years, and so this is the 2020 report technically coming out right now. And it's usually a great snapshot of what's going on in terms of seafarers and mariners out there in the industry right now. And this is international. It looks at all shipping across the board. The reason this report is done is because it allows carriers, the shipping companies, to look at shortfalls and issues in terms of crewing, demographics, nationality, you name it, everything. It's a big report. It's out there. You can get it from BIMCO ICS for, I think they sell it for about 175 pounds British. So it's within reach. It's unlike a report I talked about the other day. So if you look at the story, this is from Sam Chambers over at Splash 24/7. He's talking about the issue that one of the big demands going to be going forward is for certified officers, what's called STCW. This is the standard bridge watch requirement that all deck officers have to have. There'll be an additional 89,510 officers by 2026 to operate the world's merchant fleet. Right now, the report estimates that 1.89 million seafarers currently serve the world merchant fleet, operating over 74,000 vessels around the globe. I just had a bolt of lightning and thunder right there. So I don't know if it's ominous or not. So uh, they're going on. And one of the things they highlight here is this potential shortfall 26,000 officers. Now, I will tell you, every one of these reports always says that there's always going to be a shortfall in officers. And that's a good thing, actually, because what it's doing is saying that the market in the industry shouldn't become too complacent, that there's going to be need all the time for officers out there, for experienced mariners out there. This goes on to talk about, they talk about some other issues here. One of the things they talk about is gender. And I will tell you the statistic they show you here, and they are out front about it, is very misleading. They're saying that, for example, in the females, the number of females sailing out there has increased 48.8%. Before you get excited about that, it was only 0.7% prior to this, and now it's at 1.28%. So yeah, it's at almost a 50% increase, but it's still woefully short. And most of those women who are sailing in the maritime industry are on passenger ships and ferries. They're not out there in the deep draft ocean carriers, the bulkers, the tankers, the container ships. And so there is a huge gender division out there in the maritime industry. You're seeing it better in corporate and in visibility, but still a big issue out there. I'll go to the ICS page here. This is the International Chamber of Shipping page. They have a little more detail on here. One of the things I find very interesting here, and I'm not sure this I don't think this has been updated yet with the new information because they're still showing it at 1.65 million. I think this is the data from 2015. But one of the things I think is really important here, and I read it from some other stories, is right now there are 5 nations that supply most of the seafarers out there. So most of the 1.8 million seafarers out there are being provided by China, the Philippines, Indonesia, Russian Federation, and Ukraine. But that's for officers. In terms of ratings, China, Indonesia, Russian Federation, and Ukraine are out there. But the other big one out there in terms of officers is India. And India is mentioned here. And India has become a larger and larger provider out there. Both India and China are fighting it out for having the biggest crews out there. One of the areas that the new report says, and I haven't had a chance to go through the whole report yet, just giving you a little tidbit here. I hope to do a whole thing on the report shortly, is that one of the areas that they're looking for mariners in the future, because again, where they're going to is places where they can get them cheap. And as standard of living increases in places like China, Indonesia, the Philippines, Russia, Ukraine, they get more and more expensive, and crewing is one of the most expensive options out there. They're going to go to other places. They'll go to India, they'll go to Bangladesh, but the big area they think that we may see a lot of growth in is in Africa, which will be interesting to see. The other element that goes into these two stories is another story that came out, and this has to do with the Indian crew members on international vessels. The story came out a few days ago. This is John Conrad over in G Captain. Indian Union accuses China of unofficial seafarer ban. So China came out and basically issued this. This is from the Times of India right here. Go ahead and get my mug off here so you can see it a little better. Right here. China ban on entry of Indian sailors, says Seafarer's body. Again, and there was other stories about this. We saw it in Maritime Executive. China bans vessels crewed by Indian seafarers. China bans 9 ship managers for crew changes for 30 days. China is making it very difficult for ships with Indian crews to come into China. They're not allowing the vessels in. They're not allowing crew changes. They're not allowing anything in. And understand, Indian crews are really dominant, especially in the bulk trade, on bulk carriers and oil tankers right now. We see them. The entire crew of Ever Given was an Indian crew, for example. And this is, there's a lot of questions about this, why India is doing this. The stated reason is a very, I would say, logical reason. The vaccine that India is using is not on the WHO's approved list. So India has a vaccine that they're issuing, but it's not approved by the World Health Organization. They're not using, the Moderna, the Pfizer, what we know of today. And so they're worried about a spread of the virus into China from these ships and these crews. Now, I will mention that these crews are fairly isolated on board the vessels. They don't have a lot of interactions with shore crews. They typically stay on the vessels. There's not a lot of interaction. But I just reported the other day about a vessel off New Zealand that has the Delta virus, excuse me, that has the Delta virus that's not allowed to come in, and it's being held at Anchorage at this time. So China's not, being too off the rails here with this. But the Indian Union is basically, and then the story from John Conrad says this, and also the story here from the Times of India basically says China is targeting India specifically because of the Indian crew members. So I'll go in here. Seafarers workers unions claim that the Indian sailors are losing jobs on China-bound commercial vessels as Beijing has imposed an unofficial ban and is not allowing ships with Indian crew members to berth at Chinese ports. This is also part of an attempt by China to replace these Indian crew members with Chinese crew members. China's increased wages for their crew members. And so one of the things that you're seeing here is an attempt to usurp India out of crewing of vessels. This is a very interesting topic to be talking about. We talk a lot about China and its dominance in a lot of trade areas with Costco, the Chinese overseas shipping company, and its dominance in the container trade. We talk about the Chinese shipbuilding, where it's the largest shipbuilder in the world, one of 3, but it is the largest. And now one of the big efforts here is for China to get crewing, to get their crews on board vessels. This is a very powerful element here to control world trade. I mean, it really is. If you have crews on board vessels, they're Chinese crews, it's really big. Talked about the fact that China's building cruise ships now. And all of this kind of rolls into this issue. It rolls into another issue, too, an issue I've talked about before, where Frank Cole came on and was talking about setting up this Green Channel travel petition, where he's trying to make it so nations have to agree to allow mariners to be able to do crew changes, to get vaccinations, to get what they need. One of the things that should be being done is crews should be getting vaccinated by World Health Organization, by whatever organization is going to do this. But mariners, those 1.8 million mariners that are out there making ships move around the world, should have access to vaccines if they want them, and approved vaccines. There's no reason that these Indian crews should not be given vaccines that meet the standards. Right now in U.S. ports, Houston, Seattle, San Francisco, you name it, LA, Long Beach, they're vaccinating like crazy. Any ship that comes into the United States, if the crew wants to be vaccinated, will be vaccinated. And this offer should be being made worldwide, because if global shipping comes to a halt, we're talking about constraints in trade. One of the biggest here is what happens if the crews fall out. If we start seeing outbreaks of virus on board ships, ships will not be allowed to dock, the cargo will not be offloaded, and we can see a massive breakdown in the movement of goods. Most of these mariners are not American, they're not European, they're not what we quote unquote call Westerners, as I talked about. Again, come back here to the International Chamber of Shipping here. where they're talking about where these mariners are coming from. While China is the biggest supplier of officers, followed by the Philippines, India, Indonesia, and the Russian Federation. you know, what's going on in those countries in terms of the virus? Are they able to get crew rotations? We already know that mariners are above and beyond where they need to be. This is just going to exacerbate the issue even more. And as mariners are unable to get rotated, they're not going to come back out to vessels. You're going to see increased accidents. We've seen that already this year. Probably a lot of the issues we've talked about on this channel. A lot of these accidents are probably caused by fatigue and people being on vessels for too long. 25 people on a ship the size of Ever Given at 1,300 feet. That is a lot of work to be done by a very small crew. There's no days off. There's no slack. There's no backup. You can't call in sick. You've got to be there every day. Every day is Groundhog's Day. It's Mondays. Every day is the same thing over and over again. And as we shift more of a burden onto mariners from these, other countries, and we pay them less and less, this becomes an issue. And I think what Frank Cole is doing is beyond admirable. I mean, Frank comes out and Frank talks about, a worldwide strike to get attention to this. One of the reasons why a lot of people pick on American merchant marine is because American mariners were treated like crud for most of their lives. For most of history, they were, if you look at it, until the late 19th, early 20th century. And thanks to movements of the progressive movement, reform movements, labor unions, not just afloat but ashore and throughout the United States, we see wages go up, rights go up, all these things go up. And the problem is, since the 1920s forward, one of the things we've seen is it's very difficult for Americans to compete against this. All right, I will come in with a new episode fairly soon. Got a good storm rolling right here in beautiful North Carolina. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off. If you enjoyed the video, hit subscribe. Be sure to hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos when they come out. And also be sure to give it a thumbs up and like across social media. Until our next episode, this is Sal signing off.